What would you do if your own daughter took your villa and gave it away to her husband's family, saying, "It's theirs now"? Would you rage? Would you walk away forever? Or would you find a way to forgive and rebuild? In today's story, we follow Mira, a mother betrayed by her only child, left with nothing but memories, heartbreak, and a suitcase. But what happens when the pain of betrayal leads to courage, healing, and a chance to reclaim not just a home, but life itself? Stay tuned as we unravel this emotional journey of love, loss, and redemption, from heartbreak to hope. The morning sunlight filtered through the wide glass windows of my villa, the same one I had built with my own two hands 35 years ago. The air smelled faintly of the bougainvillea blooming outside, and for a moment I allowed myself to breathe it in, feeling proud. Every corner of this house carried a memory, my late husband's laughter echoing from the living room, my daughter's first steps down the marble hallway, the nights we stayed up during storms, praying the power wouldn't go out. It wasn't just a house. It was the story of my life. And that morning, I had no idea it was about to be taken from me. My daughter, Alina, arrived earlier than usual. She didn't call ahead, she never did anymore. She used to phone me every evening after work, but after marrying Rohan, things changed. She became distant, harder to read. It was as though she had stepped into another world, one where I no longer belonged. She walked into the living room, wearing a crisp beige suit, her hair tied neatly into a bun. Her expression was composed, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation mixed with something colder. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, sitting across from me. I smiled faintly. "You sound serious. Is everything all right?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she clasped her hands together, glancing briefly toward the doorway where her husband Rohan stood. He was tall, confident, and the kind of man who smiled only when he was winning. I never liked him, though I tried my best to accept him for Alina's sake. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "Rohan's family is in a very difficult situation. His parents, they've lost their house." I frowned. "I'm sorry to hear that, but surely they can find another place to stay." "That's the thing," Rohan interrupted smoothly. "They can't any. Real estate prices are crazy right now and, well, they don't have much saved up." He spoke politely, but his eyes were cold, calculating. I had seen that look before, in men who took advantage of kindness. Alina took a deep breath. "Mom, I was thinking, the villa is too big for you alone. You live here by yourself, and maintaining it must be exhausting. Maybe it's time to let others live here. Rohan's family could move in. It would be temporary." My heart dropped. "Temporary?" I repeated. "Alina, this house is my home. Your father and I built it. You can't just—" "Mom, please," she snapped, standing up suddenly. "You have your pension, your savings. You can rent a small apartment near the city. You won't be lonely there. And this house won't go to waste." I felt as if someone had punched the air out of my chest. "You want me to leave my home, for them?" Rohan stepped forward slightly, placing a hand on Alina's shoulder as though claiming victory. "Auntie, you should think of it as family helping family. We'll take good care of this place. You don't have to worry about anything." Family helping family. The irony cut deep. I looked at my daughter, the same little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee, who used to beg me to tell her bedtime stories, and I barely recognized her. The warmth in her eyes had been replaced with steel. "You've already made up your mind, haven't you?" I whispered. Alina's silence was answer enough. That evening, I sat alone in my bedroom, staring at the old photographs lining my nightstand. My husband's smiling face stared back at me from a frame. "You'd know what to say," I murmured softly. "You'd know how to make her understand." But he wasn't there. And the house that had once felt full of life now felt like a coffin, a beautiful, empty shell holding the remains of everything I had loved. 2 days later, Rohan's parents arrived with their suitcases. They didn't look ashamed, they looked entitled. His mother, draped in a silk sari, smiled politely, but her eyes wandered over the furniture as if she were inspecting her new property. His father barely acknowledged me at all. "Alina, where should I put my things?" his mother asked cheerfully. Alina turned to me, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, we'll just use the guest room for now. Once we arrange everything, you can decide where you'd like to move." "Move?" I repeated, my voice trembling. She nodded. "Yes, we'll help you find a nice place nearby." It was done. Just like that. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of unfamiliar voices in the kitchen. The aroma of my favorite tea was replaced by the smell of Rohan's father's cigarettes. My books had been moved from the living room shelf to make space for their decorative items. Every trace of me was slowly being erased. By the end of the week, I realized something painful. I was no longer welcome in my own home. When I tried to make dinner one evening, Rohan's mother gently placed a hand on my arm. "You should rest, Annie. I'll take care of everything. You've done enough." Her words stung more than she could ever know. That night, as I sat on the porch watching the stars, Alina joined me. For a long time, we didn't speak. Then she sighed. "Mom, please understand. This is what's best for everyone. You deserve peace. Don't make this harder." I turned to her, tears welling up. "Peace, Alina? You call this peace? Watching strangers take over the home your father and I built." She looked away, her lips pressed together. "I'm doing what I have to do. For my marriage." There was the truth. I nodded slowly. "Then you've made your choice." The following morning, I began packing my things, not because they forced me, but because staying would have been more painful. As I folded each piece of clothing, I realized something. They could take the villa, but they could never take my memories. When I walked out the front door, suitcase in hand, I looked back one last time. The house stood silent, majestic, and indifferent, as if it no longer remembered me either. I whispered, "Goodbye," and walked away. What Alina didn't know then was that the story wasn't over. Not even close. The bus rattled through the quiet countryside, carrying me farther away from the villa that had once been my world. I sat by the window, clutching a small suitcase that held everything I now owned. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, tired eyes, streaks of gray in my hair, and the faintest trace of disbelief still lingering on my face. It was strange how quickly life could shift from comfort to emptiness. One moment I was a mother, a homeowner, someone who belonged, and the next, I was just a woman with nowhere to go. I had booked a small room in a modest boarding house on the edge of town. The landlady, Mrs. Pinto, was kind, the type who liked to chat about the weather and her cats. She handed me the key with a warm smile. "It's quiet here, dear. You'll have peace." That word again. Everyone thought that's what I needed, but what I really wanted was closure. That night, as I unpacked my few belongings, I found an old photo album I had slipped into the suitcase at the last moment. I opened it and stared at the photographs. Alina as a baby in my arms, her first day of school, the day she graduated. Every image was a reminder of the love that once existed between us. Somewhere along the way, that love had been replaced by ambition, pride, and something I couldn't quite name, greed, perhaps, or fear. For days I stayed silent. I'd go for walks in the park nearby, watching families laugh together, children running freely while their parents called after them. Each laugh echoed like a ghost of my past. Then one afternoon, as I sipped tea on the boarding house porch, a familiar voice startled me. "Auntie." I turned to see Maya, a former neighbor from the old villa's neighborhood. She looked surprised, almost guilty. "Oh my goodness, I didn't expect to see you here." I heard what happened. My lips tightened. Word travels fast, I see. Maya sat beside me, lowering her voice. I didn't want to intrude, but, "Auntie, I thought you should know something. Ever since you left, things at your house have been strange." I frowned. Strange? How? Rohan's family has been hosting parties every weekend. They told everyone the house was transferred to their name. Some say they're planning to sell it. Her words hit like a slap. Sell it? But it's still under my name. Maya hesitated. That's what I thought too, but they showed papers. Documents that said otherwise. My pulse quickened. What kind of documents? She shook her head. I didn't see them closely. But Rohan told people that you willingly transferred the property. I felt my stomach twist. That's a lie. Maya placed her hand over mine. I know, Annie. That's why I came. Something's not right. Please be careful. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying Maya's words. How could they have papers? I had never signed anything, at least not knowingly. Then I remembered. A week before the confrontation, Alina had visited with some bank papers. She said they were related to a small loan for home repairs. I didn't read them carefully. I trusted her. Could that have been? My heart pounded in realization. The next morning, I visited the town registrar's office. The clerk, a polite young man, looked up my name in the system. After a moment, he frowned. "Madam, the property ownership was updated 2 weeks ago. It's now under Mr. Rohan Malhotra and Mrs. Alina Malhotra." I felt my knees weaken. That can't be. I never signed over my house. He turned the monitor slightly toward me. "The records show your signature on the deed transfer. You'll need legal assistance to dispute this." I left the office trembling. The bright sunlight outside suddenly felt cruel, almost mocking. On my way back, I stopped at a small cafe to steady myself. I ordered tea, but my hands shook so much that the cup rattled on its saucer. A man sitting at the next table, elderly with kind eyes, noticed. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I forced a smile. "Just a bit dizzy, thank you." He nodded sympathetically. Life can be heavy sometimes. My daughter kicked me out last year too. Said she needed space. I looked up in surprise. There was something comforting about hearing someone else's pain. "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "I thought I lost everything. But sometimes, losing what you love is the only way to find peace." Peace again. But this time, the word didn't sting as much. Maybe he was right. Still, I couldn't rest until I knew the truth. That evening, I called Alina. She didn't pick up the first few times, but eventually she answered. Her tone was flat. "Mom, please don't start again. You're only hurting yourself." "Alina," I said quietly, "did you transfer the house papers? Did you use my signature?" There was a long silence. Then, in a low voice, she said, "Mom, you don't understand. Rohan needed the property for business purposes. It's better this way." "Better for whom?" I snapped. "You took everything from me." "Stop making me feel guilty," she cried. "You always think I owe you something. Maybe it's time you realized I have my own life." The call ended abruptly. I sat there in the dark, phone still in my hand, listening to the dial tone like it was the echo of my broken heart. But beneath the sorrow, something else was beginning to grow, anger. Not the kind that fades after tears, but the quiet, burning kind that demands justice. The next morning, I went to see a lawyer. His office was small but tidy, lined with dusty books and the faint smell of old paper. He listened patiently as I told him everything. After a long pause, he said, "If your daughter forged your signature, that's a serious crime. We can request the original deed and have it examined. But you must be prepared. This will be painful." I nodded. I've already lost my home. What more pain can there be? As I left his office, the sun was setting, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. I looked at it and thought of my husband. I could almost hear his voice in the wind. "Don't let them take what's yours, Mira." For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of purpose. The villa might have been gone, but the fight for my dignity had just begun. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about reclaiming the part of me that had been stolen. The mother, the woman, the soul who refused to be erased. The following week felt like walking through fog, each day heavy, thick with memories and unanswered questions. I had always been a calm woman, one who believed in forgiveness and patience. But as I sat at my lawyer's desk reviewing the documents, something inside me hardened. "Are you certain you didn't authorize this transfer?" the lawyer, Mr. Sen, asked, peering over his glasses. "Absolutely certain," I replied firmly. I trusted my daughter, but I never agreed to give away my home. Mr. Sen nodded slowly. "Then we'll begin by requesting the original signed deed from the registrar. If there's forgery, we'll prove it." I clenched my hands together, steadying my voice. "And what happens then?" "Then," he said, leaning back, "we'll take them to court." The word felt foreign cold. I had never imagined sitting in a courtroom fighting my own daughter. But then again, I had never imagined she would take my home either. That night, I walked along the narrow streets near the boarding house, thinking about everything I had lost. The wind carried faint laughter from a nearby cafe, young couples talking about dreams, not betrayals. I envied them. When I returned to my room, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. My heart jumped. It had no name, just the words, "You don't know what they're planning." Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed photograph. My villa, decorated, lit up, crowded with people. A large banner hung above the gate. "Grand opening Malhotra luxury homestay." I gasped, covering my mouth. They hadn't just taken my house. They were turning it into a business. Tears burned my eyes as I called Maya again. "Did you know about this?" She sighed heavily. "I was afraid to tell you, Auntie. They renovated your rooms, repainted everything. They've turned your villa into a guest house for tourists. They're charging a fortune for each room." The betrayal deepened like a knife twisting in my chest. "And Alina? She's helping them. She told people you gifted the house as a wedding blessing." I couldn't speak. My daughter, my only child, had rewritten the story of my love as a lie. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, staring at the moon, remembering all the nights I'd stayed awake comforting Alina when she was little. I used to whisper to her, "You're my reason for everything." And now, she had become the reason for my heartbreak. Days turned into weeks as the investigation continued. Mr. Sen was thorough, his assistant gathering every file, every signature, every date. Finally, one afternoon, he called me to his office. "I have something," he said, spreading the papers across his desk. "Here's your original deed. And this," he pointed at another document, "is the transfer form they submitted. Look here." He placed both sheets side by side. My name was there in elegant cursive, my handwriting or what looked like it. But as I studied it closer, my stomach dropped. The signature wasn't quite right. The loops were too wide, the strokes slightly tilted. It was close, but not mine. Mr. Sen nodded. "It's a forged signature," No doubt. Whoever did this practiced it carefully. We'll get a handwriting expert to confirm. My mind flashed back to that afternoon Alina had brought those loan documents. She'd sat across from me, smiling sweetly as I signed a few pages without reading them. My chest tightened. She hadn't forged it, she tricked me. She used me, I whispered. Mr. Sen's eyes softened. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mira, but you have proof now. You can win this. I wasn't sure if winning was the right word. Nothing about this felt like victory. That evening, I went back to the old neighborhood. I stood at the end of the street, hidden behind a large banyan tree, watching my villa from a distance. It looked so different. Bright lights, fancy cars, laughter spilling out of the windows. Guests were checking in, pulling suitcases through the gates. The signboard shimmered in the golden lights. Malhotra Villa, Heritage Homestay. It was as if the house itself had forgotten me. Suddenly, I saw Alina step out onto the porch. She was laughing with Rohan, looking radiant, confident, like the woman she'd always wanted to be. But when her laughter faded, she looked around quietly, and for a moment, her eyes softened. It was only for a second, but I saw it, the guilt. Then she turned away. I left before anyone noticed me. A few days later, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a man's voice said, "Is this Mrs. Mira Kapoor?" "Yes. I'm an employee at Malhotra Villa. I shouldn't be calling you, but I thought you should know, something's wrong with your daughter's husband." My pulse quickened. "Who is this?" "I can't say. But Rohan, he's using your property as collateral for a loan. A big one. He told investors he owns multiple villas. Please, do something before it's too late." The line went dead. My hands trembled as I clutched the phone. The betrayal wasn't over, it was evolving. If Rohan was borrowing money against my property, he was dragging Alina into a disaster. I called Mr. Sen immediately. "We have to act fast," I said. He agreed. "I'll file an injunction to freeze any financial transaction tied to the property. That'll stop them for now." I thanked him, but my heart was heavy. I didn't want revenge, I wanted truth. I wanted my daughter to open her eyes before everything collapsed. That night, rain poured outside, heavy and relentless. I sat by the window again, the thunder rumbling like the storm inside me. I picked up a pen and began writing a letter to Alina. "My dearest daughter, I don't know what has changed in you. I don't know why you let greed shadow the love we once shared. But remember this, a house can be stolen, but peace cannot. One day, the truth will come for you, and I won't be the one you'll have to answer to, it will be your own heart." When I finished, I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my diary. I didn't know if I'd ever send it, but writing it made me feel lighter, as if a small part of my burden had been released. The next morning, I woke to a knock on my door. When I opened it, Mrs. Pinto stood there, holding a newspaper. "You might want to see this," she said softly. The headline read, "Businessman Rohan Malhotra under investigation for fraudulent property dealings." My eyes widened. The article detailed how Rohan had been accused of using forged property papers to secure large loans from private investors. Authorities had frozen his assets. I sank into a chair, speechless. It was happening. The truth was surfacing, like a storm breaking after weeks of heavy silence. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a faint smile. Maybe this was fate's way of returning balance, not through my hands, but through justice itself. And though the road ahead would still be painful, I knew one thing for sure. The storm had begun, not to destroy me, but to cleanse the lies that had been built on my love. The morning after the news broke felt strangely calm. The city moved as usual, buses honking, vendors shouting, people rushing to work, but for me, time had slowed. For months, I had lived with the quiet ache of betrayal, and now the storm had finally erupted. I sat by the small table in my rented room, the newspaper spread open before me. Rohan's face stared back at me from the front page, smug no longer, replaced by a hollow arrogance that had collapsed under its own greed. The article detailed how he had forged ownership documents, taken large loans, and was now under investigation for fraud. His business partners had fled. The investors were demanding repayment. The villa, my villa, was now frozen under legal hold. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a victim. I poured myself a cup of tea and whispered, "The truth always finds its way home." But alongside the relief, there was a deep sadness for my daughter. I could only imagine what Alina was going through. Her dream life, her luxury, her pride, all crumbling around her because of one man's lies and her own blindness. 3 days later, I received a call. It was Alina. Her voice trembled. "I need to see you." I hesitated. "Where are you?" "At the villa." The pause. "Please. I don't know who else to turn to." Something in her tone, raw, broken, made my heart ache. Despite everything, she was still my daughter. I took the first taxi I could find. When I arrived, the villa looked like a wounded animal, its gates rusting, the once bright walls stained with rain and neglect. Gone were the lights, the flowers, the laughter. The grand Malhotra Villa sign lay broken on the ground, half buried in mud. Inside, I found Alina sitting on the staircase, her head buried in her hands. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "Mom," she whispered, looking up as I entered. "They took everything. The investors, the police, they froze all the accounts. Rohan's gone into hiding." I stood silently for a moment, studying her. She looked so small, not the proud, defiant woman who had once thrown me out, but a frightened child again. "Why didn't you come sooner?" I asked softly. She sobbed. "I was ashamed. I thought I was doing the right thing. Rohan said it was just business, that we'd return the villa to you later. I wanted him to love me, to be proud of me. I didn't see what was happening." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "And when I asked you if you used my signature?" Her face crumpled. "He told me to. He said you'd understand if you knew what it was for. I didn't think it would go this far." The words sliced through me, sharp and cold. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to ask how she could have done it. But then I saw her shaking, her shoulders trembling under the weight of guilt. I knelt beside her. "Alina, you broke my heart. But you're still my daughter. We can fix what's left, not the house, maybe, but ourselves." She looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Do you really think so? After everything I've done?" I nodded slowly. Love doesn't die from betrayal. It just hides until we're ready to face it again. Over the next few days, the truth continued to unravel like a tightly wound thread. News outlets reported more details. Rohan had been running multiple fraudulent investments using other people's properties. Several families had lost their homes because of him. Alina stayed with me in the small room at Mrs. Pinto's boarding house. The first few nights were quiet. She barely spoke, only cried when she thought I was asleep. I would hear her whisper apologies into the dark. On the fourth morning, she asked timidly, "Do you hate me?" I looked up from my cup of tea. "No, Alina. Hate is a heavy thing. I pity what this world did to you, how it taught you that love means giving up your soul to please someone else." She blinked, surprised. "I just wanted to be good enough for him." "You already were," I said gently. "You just forgot." A week later, Mr. Sun called with updates. "Mrs. Kapoor, the court has frozen all Malhotra assets, including the villa. Once the investigation concludes, we can appeal for restitution. You'll likely regain legal ownership." I thanked him, though my heart was no longer fixed on the villa. The home I wanted back wasn't made of walls or marble floors. It was sitting right across from me, sipping tea quietly, learning how to breathe again. That evening, Alina and I took a walk along the shore. The sea stretched endlessly, the waves whispering softly against the sand. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I used to dream of leaving that house, you know? I thought it trapped me. But now, I realize it was the only place I was ever truly safe." I smiled faintly. Homes aren't prisons, Alina. They're mirrors. You only feel trapped when you stop liking the person you see inside. She nodded, tears welling again. I wish I could undo it all. You can't, I said gently. But you can rebuild. That's what matters. The next morning, we went back to the villa one last time, this time under police supervision. Officers cataloged evidence, investors gathered outside demanding answers. The grand halls echoed with emptiness, dust motes dancing in the sunlight that streamed through cracked windows. I wandered through the rooms silently, the living room where my husband and I had celebrated our anniversaries, the kitchen where Alina used to steal sweets as a child, the garden where we planted roses every spring. It all looked smaller now, as if the greed and lies had drained its life away. An officer approached me. "Ma'am, once the investigation is complete, the property will likely be returned to you." I smiled sadly. "Thank you, officer. But I think I've already let it go." He looked puzzled, but I didn't explain. Some things didn't need explaining. That night, Alina and I sat by the sea again, our feet buried in cool sand. The air smelled of salt and rain. "Mom," she said quietly, "what will we do now?" I thought for a moment. We start small. Maybe a cafe or a guest house by the sea. Something that's ours, truly ours this time. She smiled weakly. "No more lies." "No more lies," I agreed. The wind picked up, gentle and cool, carrying away the last traces of bitterness. For the first time in years, I felt light, not because I had won, but because I had survived. I turned to her and said, "You know, Alina, sometimes losing everything is the only way to see what really matters." She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. "I see it now, Mom." As the waves rolled in under the moonlight, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for revenge, not for restitution, but for peace. Because peace, I realized, was the only home that could never be taken away. The morning sun peeked through the thin curtains of my small rented apartment, warming the rough wooden floor that had become my world for the last few months. It was strange how a person could lose everything, yet still wake up each day with the stubborn will to start again. I had gone from a woman who once hosted charity dinners in her villa to someone who now brewed tea on a single electric stove. And yet, there was peace here, a kind I had never known in the marble halls of my former home. That morning, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I opened my journal, a habit I had started after leaving. I wrote a single line. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself. Just as I placed my pen down, my phone buzzed. It was from an unknown number. For a moment, I hesitated, then answered. "Hello. Is this Mrs. Varma?" a calm female voice asked. "Yes, speaking. This is Priya from Sancha Foundation. We received your volunteer form. Are you still interested in joining our community outreach program?" I froze. I had applied weeks ago but never expected a response. "Yes, absolutely. When can I start?" Priya's voice brightened. "We're organizing a women's shelter renovation this weekend. You could start there. We could really use your experience." Experience. The word echoed inside me. For the first time in months, Someone saw value in me beyond being a mother, a wife, or a betrayed woman. "I'll be there," I said softly. That weekend, I found myself at a crumbling old building in the heart of the city. It was called Asha Niwas, House of Hope. Volunteers were everywhere, painting walls, repairing windows, scrubbing floors. There was laughter, chatter, and the kind of energy that came only from people trying to make a difference. As I picked up a brush and joined them, something inside me shifted. Each stroke of paint felt like I was rewriting my past, covering scars with color, pain with purpose. "Ma'am, could you help us organize the donated clothes?" a young girl named Nisha asked. "Of course," I replied with a smile. Hours passed like minutes. I worked, laughed, and shared stories with women who had faced worse than I had: abandonment, abuse, poverty. Yet their eyes still shone with resilience. Compared to them, my pain seemed smaller, my loss less final. By sunset, the shelter looked alive again. And so did I. A few days later, Priya introduced me to a man who had sponsored most of the renovation, Arjun Mehta. He was in his late 40s, with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor that carried both strength and sadness. "Mrs. Varma," he greeted me with a polite nod. "I've heard about your contribution here. You've done remarkable work." "Thank you," I replied, feeling a strange warmth rise to my cheeks. We talked for hours that day, about the shelter, life, and the strange ways fate tested people. He told me he had lost his wife years ago and had devoted his life to helping others heal. There was no pity in his voice, only understanding. Before leaving, he said something that lingered in my mind long after he was gone. "Sometimes, the people who hurt us are just mirrors, showing us the strength we didn't know we had." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of his words. For the first time, I realized my daughter's betrayal didn't define me. It freed me. Over the following weeks, I poured myself into the foundation. I managed events, helped women learn new skills, and even started mentoring a few of them in small business ventures. Slowly, I began to rebuild my life, not through wealth or luxury, but through meaning. One day, Priya approached me with an envelope. "This is for you," she said. "A small honorarium for your service." I shook my head. "I didn't do it for money." She smiled. "We know. But take it. You've earned it." When I opened it, I found a modest check, but it felt like a fortune. Not because of the amount, but because it symbolized independence. I used it to rent a small studio where I began teaching art therapy sessions for trauma survivors. Each class reminded me of who I used to be and who I was becoming. One evening, as I closed the studio, a courier approached me. "Mrs. Varma? This is for you." It was a thick envelope with my daughter's handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Mom, I don't know where to begin. Things aren't the same anymore. The villa, it doesn't feel like home. They argue all the time and I can't breathe there. I miss you. I miss your voice, your food, your laughter." I thought giving them the villa would make them love me, but I was wrong. I lost everything, just like you did. Tears blurred my vision. "If you can ever forgive me, I'd like to see you. Please." For a long moment, I sat in silence, my heart torn between anger and love. But then, like a whisper from my soul, I heard Arjun's voice in my mind. "The people who hurt us are just mirrors." I smiled sadly and folded the letter. That night, I walked to the window of my tiny apartment. The city lights flickered below, distant, yet comforting. I realized I had already risen from my ashes. Not because I had wealth again, but because I had peace. My daughter's betrayal had broken me, yes, but it had also built someone new. Someone stronger, freer, and braver. I took out a new page in my journal and wrote, "Forgiveness is not for them, it's for me. I forgive, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve peace." And for the first time in a long while, I truly meant it. As the night deepened, I closed my eyes and whispered, "Tomorrow I'll go see her." The journey wasn't over, but I was finally ready to walk it, with love instead of pain. As we stepped out of the villa that evening, the setting sun painted the sky with orange and gold. It felt symbolic, an ending and a beginning all at once. Ananya slipped her hand into mine. "Mom," she whispered, "thank you for not giving up on me." I squeezed her fingers gently. "That's what mothers do, my child. We bend, we break, but we never stop loving." And as we walked away, leaving the past behind, I realized that forgiveness was never about forgetting. It was about choosing love over pain, every single time. The early morning sun spilled through the window of our new apartment, a small, cozy space overlooking the park where I once took Ananya as a child. The sound of birds mixed with the faint hum of the city below, and for the first time in what felt like years, the air around me felt calm. It had been 3 months since we left the villa behind. 3 months since my daughter and I began rebuilding, not just our lives, but the trust that had been shattered between us. As I stood by the window, stirring my tea, I could see Ananya watering the little potted plants on the balcony. Her face looked softer now, freed from the weight of guilt that had burdened her for so long. She noticed me watching and smiled. "Good morning, Mo. You're up early." I smiled back. Old habits die hard. She walked in and sat across from me at the small wooden table we had bought secondhand from the market. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked hesitantly. "The villa?" I paused. "Sometimes. But not the way you think. I miss the garden, the laughter, the smell of fresh paint when we first moved in. But that place stopped being home long before we left." Ananya nodded slowly. "Yeah, I guess you're right. A house isn't home when it holds more pain than love." Our days soon settled into a peaceful rhythm. I spent my mornings volunteering at the Sanjha Foundation, continuing my art therapy classes for women rebuilding their lives after loss. Ananya, on the other hand, had found a job at a publishing company. She often came home late, exhausted but fulfilled. There was a glow in her eyes again, a light I hadn't seen since her wedding. One evening, as we sat having dinner, she looked up at me thoughtfully. "Mom, I've been saving up. I want to buy back the villa." I froze for a moment, my spoon halfway to my mouth. "Why?" "I don't want it for them, or even for me," she said. "I want to make it a women's home. A place for those who have nowhere else to go. Like you did with your art center. It should mean something again." Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. For years, I had believed that house symbolized loss. But hearing her words, I realized it could also symbolize redemption. I reached across the table and took her hand. "If that's truly what you want, I'll help you." She smiled softly. "I was hoping you'd say that." 2 months later, after what felt like endless paperwork and negotiations, we stood once again before the familiar iron gates of Varma Villa. It looked the same, and yet different. The paint had peeled, the garden was overgrown, and the once grand entrance felt eerily silent. But there was something poetic about returning, not in defeat, but in purpose. Ananya turned to me, her voice trembling. "Are you ready?" I nodded. "Let's bring it back to life." We spent the following weeks cleaning, repainting, planting new flowers, and repairing what time and neglect had damaged. But more than the physical work, it was an emotional restoration. The house that once held betrayal now echoed with laughter again, this time from women and children who came seeking shelter, comfort, and safety. We named it Naya Disha, New Direction. One evening, as I was finishing paperwork in the new office we had set up, the security guard called out, "Ma'am, someone's here to see you." When I looked up, my heart skipped a beat. It was Rohit. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, his clothes wrinkled, his face weary. "Mrs. Varma," he said quietly, "may I come in?" I gestured toward the chair opposite me. "Please." He sat down, avoiding my eyes. "I heard what you've done with the villa. It's admirable." "Thank you," I said evenly. He sighed deeply. "I didn't come here to make excuses. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything." I watched him for a moment. He looked like a man who had finally understood the cost of his pride. "I forgive you," I said softly. "But understand, forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it only frees us from it." He nodded, visibly relieved. "I wish I'd realized that sooner." Before leaving, he turned once more. "Take care of her, Tanya. She's stronger than she knows." "I will," I said, though inside, I knew she didn't need me to anymore. She had found her strength on her own. Months later, Naya Disha was finally ready to open its doors officially. Invitations went out to local organizations, donors, and volunteers. On the day of the ceremony, the villa looked alive again, its walls repainted in warm colors, its garden filled with fresh blooms. The air buzzed with excitement. As guests arrived, I stood beside Ananya, watching her interact confidently with the crowd. She looked radiant, her poise graceful, her voice strong. When it was time to speak, she stepped up to the microphone. "I once called this house my mother's pride," she began. "Then I turned it into her pain. But she forgave me, and in that forgiveness she taught me what true love is. This house now belongs to every woman who has ever been broken, abandoned, or lost. Here, we rebuild not just walls, but lives." Applause filled the air. I couldn't stop the tears that rolled down my cheeks. When she finished, she turned to me, took my hand, and whispered, "Mom, this is your legacy." I shook my head gently. "No, my dear. This is ours." That night, after everyone left, I walked through the quiet halls of Naya Disha. The air smelled of jasmine again, just like it had all those years ago. I paused in front of the old living room mirror, my reflection soft under the warm lights. So much had changed. I was no longer the woman who had walked out of this house with tears and nothing but a suitcase. I was someone new, reborn from pain, grounded in peace. Ananya joined me, standing by my side. Together, we looked at our reflections, two women who had lost everything, only to find themselves again. "Do you think Dad would have been proud?" she asked quietly. I smiled. "He would have been proud of both of us." Outside, the wind rustled through the garden, carrying with it the scent of new beginnings. We stepped out onto the balcony, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. For the first time, there was no heaviness between us, only the calm of understanding, the quiet of healing. I placed my arm around her shoulders. "Life has a strange way of coming full circle, doesn't it?" Ananya leaned her head against me. "Yes, it does. And maybe that's the beauty of it." Months later, as I sat in the garden surrounded by the women we had helped, I opened my old journal once again. On the first page I had written years ago, "Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself." Now, I added one final line beneath it. "And sometimes, finding yourself is how you bring others home." As I closed the journal, I looked toward the horizon where the morning sun rose, a golden promise of everything still to come. For the first time in a long, long while, I was home. Sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find yourself. And sometimes, forgiveness and courage can help you rebuild a life even stronger than before. Mira and her daughter's journey reminds us that family, love, and resilience are far more valuable than any house or material possession. The villa may have been taken, but the bond between mother and daughter and their new purpose could never be broken. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, every ending can be a new beginning.